Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, it seems like finally the transfer portal is starting to wind down. It was an extremely busy last 30 days, broke down a lot of commitments. Let's put a bow on this winter transfer portal window and talk about the biggest winners and the biggest losers that we saw over the last couple of weeks. Still, you make no mistake about it. There are a lot of teams that really made their rosters a lot better over the last couple of weeks. There are a lot of teams that probably got worse over the transfer portal cycle as well. And that's probably where I want to start this conversation. Is this is not a knock on 24/7 Sports on through whatever site you use to get your rankings. They do a great job. Looking at the number that gets spit out from their calculations, at least in my opinion, is probably not the best method to evaluate how teams did. Because you can bring in 20 players, but if you lost 15 good players, player retention has played a very strong role in the landscape of college football over the last couple of years since the transfer portal has been this popular. That's what I look for. Say, all right, what teams got better? What teams brought in a lot of players, good players at positions they needed to? But what are the teams that are also keeping their good talent within the program going into next season? That's where I want to start this conversation. Before we do, and as always, I think most importantly, let it fly. There's a lot of teams that you could mention in terms of winners and losers. The amount of support y'all have shown the fellas over the last couple of weeks as we've broken down commitments, been amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, I'll put you on the tee box first. Biggest winner of this year's winter transfer portal window. Who you got here?
I mean, it's got to be Texas Tech. I mean, you talk about a program that's just went out there and punched well above its weight in terms of where I think a lot of people have Texas Tech on the college football hierarchy. I mean, they went out and they won battles, and not just big-time battles like winning for wide receivers and other positions, but at those like real premium positions that just didn't feel like the portal was super deep with those guys. I mean, they won consistently. Like, go get a guy like Zambrano at the offensive tackle spot, a guy that pretty much any team in the country probably would have wanted. Getting a guy like Lee Hunter at the defensive tackle spot, another position that you'll look at the big dogs that needed depth at that position. It's pretty much any team in the country you look at in their ability to go win those type of battles. So not just like the quantity of guys they brought in, but the quality of guys they brought in at those hyper premium positions, I think was huge. And talk about a team that didn't lose a whole lot. Aside from Micah Hudson, that's probably the only portal guy I looked at like, ooh, that's probably a hit. But other than that,
yeah, they retained. And my biggest takeaway is kind of what you said. It's not only landing a lot of good players, it was at those premium positions where everybody's looking to enhance, like on the offensive line and the interior of that defensive line.
And they put themselves in an incredible position now to go probably win a Big 12 championship potentially. Like, I look at that roster, like they have the quarterback right, they have the skill players right. I think they added to both sides of their lines of scrimmage. I mean, that's a team that I look at. It's going to be very competitive in the Big 12.
It might be the best roster in the Big 12 going into 2025. I'll have to do a little bit more digging. I think Arizona State and what Kenny Dillingham's doing is some big-time stuff. But Texas Tech, from a roster standpoint, they're checking a lot of boxes going into 2025. Dill, I got on and started with the first minutes running my mouth about not using the rankings to make your decision. Now I'm going to go with LSU, the number one team according to 24/7 Sports. Look, what I love about LSU is not only did you bring in a lot of players with 16 commitments, 8 of which were four-star guys, very quality football players, it seemed to be so targeted at positions of need. Dill, it seems like so many programs just go out and get players to get players. LSU did not take that. They brought in a lot of players, but it was all like, hey, where do we need to get better at? All right, wide receiver. Like, wide receiver just was not good enough for LSU in 2024. Go bring in Barry and Brown. Go bring in Nick Anderson. You needed more talent and depth at the edge. Guys like Jack Pyburn, guys like Patrick Payton. Then in the secondary, Monster Delane, I think, was the number one cornerback in the portal. LSU goes and lands him to Marcus Cooley at nickel. It was a lot of good players at positions they needed to address. That's what the transfer portal's for. Like, just filling in their cracks that you need to immediately address going into next year. I feel like LSU did that just about as good as any team across the country.
And I liked what LSU did. I had them as my number 4 winner.
Oh, that's so low. Why?
Because they didn't address defensive tackle. Like, I still look like I like the guys coming up, Dominic McKinley, Ahmad Bro, like those guys I find very encouraging. but they lose a couple of their veterans, guys like JVR Suggs and Jalen Lee. And again, those guys, frankly, LSU probably could afford to lose because I don't look at them as particularly high-level contributors at SEC or at the SEC level. But they also didn't go out and grab a guy like a Cole Brevard or a Travis Shaw, like those guys who, again, maybe aren't going to be starters for LSU, but I just don't think their interior defensive line is going to be deep enough. And that's frankly the second straight year.
Okay, I do agree with that. Second straight year. What I found interesting about that position is they didn't really try. It's not like they swung and missed. They just didn't swing, which either tells me, one, maybe it's just a mismanagement of the roster, or hey, we know what we got with Don McKinley.
And that's a really good point because, like, look, I mean, if Brian Kelly knew they weren't good enough on defensive line, he would have been swinging for those guys we just mentioned. And you're probably right. They really didn't take big swings at them. They let some guys go that I think otherwise they maybe wouldn't let go. I mean, we'll see. But I look right now on the surface, I have two guys I think in that room that I really like. And then I kind of have some questions.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So LSU at 4 seems low. I'll take it. Number 2 overall winner for yourself. Where are you going?
I had Miami, and I look at a team.
I like that. They're 3
Miami, again, talk about a team that did not lose good players. Like, they've recruited really pretty well since Mario Cristobal got there. You don't see them losing their big dogs. I mean, Isaiah Horton's the one guy I look at, but even he, it's like, I don't know that he's a crippling loss. Like, probably wouldn't have wanted to lose him, but he's not a guy that I'd lose sleep over like a Maui Noah or Ruben Bain. Some of those guys, if they lost them, I'd have some questions. And then I look at what they were able to do, not only at quarterback, Carson Beck, obviously a huge thing because they could not have gone into the season with Emory Williams and had a ton of confidence from me in terms of what they can be. But then the secondary, I think they killed it. I think they brought in high-level guys at at both the positions, cornerback and safety. And I look, that room, at least now I look at, I certainly think they have the talent to be a good room. Now, whether they are and whether it gels together, we'll certainly see. But they did what they had to do from a talent acquisition standpoint to make
exactly what it's supposed to look. You know, you left 2024 with 2 big question marks. What are we doing at quarterback? And we just need bodies in the secondary. They go out and get what a lot of people think is the best quarterback in the transfer portal, in Carson Beck, who not only a really good football player, perfect fit in terms of what Miami wants to do. Like Carson Beck, really good with a good run game, work and play action. Miami's going to be able to run the football in 2025. That's a perfect fit, bona fide home run for me. What they did in the secondary was just some next level stuff. I mean, that you could make the argument that it was by far the weakest portion of that Miami Hurricanes team in 2024. Is it the best position group on the defensive side of the football heading into 2025? That's a realistic claim to make. I think Miami smashed it as well.
And they didn't lose the guys you wouldn't have wanted to. Like OJ Frederick, I think, could have seen the amount of corners they brought in from kind of starting caliber guys and maybe thought, oh, I don't know if this is the place for me anymore. Zaquan Patterson, a young developmental guy who I think a lot of people would be interested in, didn't leave. Like, they're guys that I think, again, they lost some guys in the secondary. That's perfectly okay. I think some of those guys probably it was time to leave Miami, but I think they did keep their pieces along with adding a lot of really good talent.
I'm going to scroll down to number 11 for my next winner. It's the Oregon Ducks.
I like it.
Couple of things that stand out to me about Oregon. One, the quality of transfer is elite, right? 7 out of your 9 guys are 4-star prospects, bona fide plug-and-play starters. At the premium positions, right, you had to replace 2 NFL tackles in a Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly. Isaiah World, the number 1 tackle in the portal. Alex Harkey, a top 5 tackle in the portal. That's how you do it. You go get Emmanuel Pregnon, who had a day 2 NFL draft grade next to his name. Dylan Tiemann, you needed to become more athletic at safety. You got the number 1 safety in the portal. Very targeted. And look, it's not the transfer portal that we're used to seeing from Oregon that went out and landed 15 guys last year. But they don't need to anymore. Like, Dan Lanning is building that pipeline out of the high school trail. There's a lot less holes in this roster than there were 12, 24 months ago. Last thing I'll say about Oregon, as much as people want to pound Dan Lanning for not developing his own talent, you don't see people leave Oregon that are good football players. Like, even last year when they brought in 15 transfer portal commitments, of which 10 of them were kind of like plug and play bona fide starters, Oregon does not lose starting caliber guys in the portal. And so their ability to recruit high school, recruit at a very high clip in the transfer portal, as well retain their roster, it's about as good as any program is doing it, in my opinion, Give me Oregon as my number 2 winner of the
And
board.
frankly, like this is the year you kind of get to really determine whether Dan Lanning and his player development is on point in the way I think you really want. And I don't know what like people are looking at that makes them think it's like off track, if you will.
Oh, it's crazy.
You bring in really good portal guys, but I also look, they're defensive ends. Like those are homegrown, really, really good players. You look at young guys like Mateo you look at guys like Blake Purchase. You obviously look at a guy like
Tatum Tuioti. Got you.
34. I had the number in my head, but I was putting the name. You look at those guys, they're developing at a really high level. Again, they're probably the wide receiver position is the position I'm going to be looking at in terms of like what do they have coming up through the pipeline, because it's frankly a position. I know they added Malik Benson. I'm not sure I have a ton of faith in him necessarily in being an instant game changer, but he has the talent to do it. So we'll see what he can be. That's going to be the position I look at. Like, are they good enough there? Are the young guys in that roster, in that development pipeline, going to be ready to take the reins and be big dogs? Because I know Evan Stewart's good, but aside from him, I don't think it's a wildly proven room, obviously.
Oh, sign me up for the Oregon wide receiver room. Like the Corian Moore, I think is going to be one of the best wide receivers in the country immediately. And I know that might be like some recency bias because we saw guys like Jeremiah Smith.
These young freshmen coming and playing that early.
Corian Moore is that guy. Jeremiah McClellan, again, another name I love. I'm high on what Oregon has at wide receiver. Dill, do you have any more winners that jump out you want to talk about? Because I got a couple other shout-outs that I want to give.
I think South Carolina was a winner. In the South Carolina, another team that didn't have a huge portal class, but you talk about retention really on point in adding a couple of really high-level guys. Yeah. Certainly there are positions like the defensive line. Did they address that enough with proven guys? That's probably my one big question. Maybe you could like ditto the linebacker room, but I think they got their number one running back. That was kind of the huge one, and they really needed it because you look at that bowl game, I don't think they have that guy right now on the roster totally ready to go. Like their young guys might be getting there, but they need a guy to maximize Lenora Sellers. They go out, get Rasul Faison, really like that. And again, I think their retention really strong. I thought it was a good portal for South Carolina. As much as it was a bit of a quiet one, but a good one.
Nobody thought that was one of the teams I was going to shout out. I was going to shout out South Carolina, and I was going to shout out Florida. And you'd be like, hey, idiot, why are you shouting out Florida? They landed 3 commitments. Or if I think it's up to 4 now. Because they didn't lose it. Like you look at South Carolina and Florida, a ton of young talent that I'm sure there was some tampering that was going on in terms of programs looking at that young roster and saying, hey, let's go see if we can take a crack at some of those guys. Perfect example, Tree Babalade on the offensive line for South Carolina. Maybe not even slated to start in 2025. That is a quality offensive lineman that you want to keep on your roster. South Carolina goes out and makes sure they're retaining guys like Dylan Stewart, like Lenore Sellers. You can say the same thing for Florida. And what I'd add for Florida is not only did they retain their young talent, they used their NIL. Instead of going out and getting brand new players, hey, Caleb Banks, you can stay 1 more year. You could go be a top 100 pick in the NFL draft. Come stay here. Jake Slaughter, Austin Barber at the left tackle spot. I mean, it was, to me, really impressive in terms of how they retained that roster. And you look at what they played like in November. This is one of the hottest teams in the country. They said, hey, we don't need anything really. We just got to make sure we're running it back with this team in 2025. And if we do so, we're going to put ourselves in a damn good spot. I'll give one more shout out before we get into the losers, Dill. Give me Auburn. Why Auburn? I'm a Jackson Arnold believer. What they did with Jackson, I love the process. So many coaches are afraid to take the big swing. Like Hugh Freeze could have been conservative and said, "Hey, let's go get a Caden Salter. We'll probably win 8 games, and maybe some of that noise around my job cools off a little bit." Hugh Freeze says, "No, we're Auburn. I'm going into year 3. I want to compete for an SEC championship." He takes a big rip at Jackson Arnold. Now, might he strike out and potentially lose his job? Yeah, he could. There's also a very feasible avenue of Auburn being one of the best teams in the SEC if Jackson Arnold plays like a 5-star quarterback that we all thought he was coming out of high school. And I'll say this, they didn't make the same mistake Oklahoma did. Oklahoma, horrible offensive line, couldn't run the football. Every single pass catcher got hurt on that team. Said, hey, we're going to bring in Jackson Arnold. It's going to be a brand new offense for you, dude. Like we're going to make sure our offensive line's solid. We're going to run the football effectively. We're going to put potentially what is the best wide receiver room in the country around you. Dill, if they hit on Jackson Arnold, they don't only hit and win 8 games. They could be competitive for an SEC championship love the fact that Hugh Freeze took a big rip when we see a lot of programs, a lot of head coaches just worry about staying put.
Because they did put the infrastructure around him, and
Around
that
him,
was the
yeah.
big thing. Like, you go out, get a guy like Xavier Chaplin, like a really, really high-level left tackle, add a couple of wide receivers, add some depth pieces on the offensive line. Like, yeah, they're going to give Jackson Arnold a real shot to have a really successful year. And I think, again, you look at the talent, you see the flashes, and also just like his will to kind of drive that Oklahoma team in certain moments where nothing was working around them. I kind of like what he's got in him. And again, you're kind of right. Like, who knows what he's going to
It's a
end up being,
risk.
but you took your shot and you got
Yeah, and I respect him for doing it, because I just feel like so many coaches will play it safe and try to keep their job. And Hugh Freeze probably knows that. Look, the transfer portal class for Auburn, when we revisit this in 12 months, it's going to be predicated on Jackson Arnold. If Jackson Arnold hits, you're saying that's a great transfer portal class. If he doesn't matter if Eric Singleton was solid. It doesn't matter if Xavier Chaplin played well. It was a bad transfer portal class, and there's a chance Hugh Freeze loses his job. But at least he took the risk. Losers, Dill, I think you have to start with probably Colorado. And Colorado fans who are checking this out, I would love to hear from you all in the comments section. 17 commitments, 1 4-star, 15 3-stars. Not too worried about those numbers. Why I mentioned Colorado, even though they're top 20 according to 24/7 Sports, is they've kind of built a program where it's like you got to hit home runs in the transfer portal because you don't bring that big of a class from the high school ranks in. I thought they hit a home run last year.
That's
I
kind
thought
of
it
what I
was,
was thinking. It
and
was just different this year.
they were really, really good. They significantly improved their roster, and that showed on the football field. This year, I don't think they hit a home run. Like, I think they did a solid job, but because you're almost essentially ignoring the high school ranks, you have to hit home runs in the transfer portal, and I don't know if they hit that there.
They
So
just
for
need
me,
more proven players in a given year, like they had last year. Like last year, you looked like proven player, proven player, proven
yeah,
player. You kind of knew what you were getting, and then your young guys like a Draylon Miller or Jordan Seaton, like if you hit on them and you hit well, like they were huge contributors. But you also knew that they were going to be really good players if they beat the guys out they beat out. This year, you probably have a little bit of a different look, because you just didn't bring in as many proven players. And it's similar to Ole Miss. Like, I don't think Ole Miss, I certainly wouldn't call them a loser of the portal, but that's another team that to be what they want to be, which is competing for legit national titles, they probably needed to bring in more instant impact guys. Now, I will say, when I was looking at Ole Miss's depth chart, I thought there's more guys who I'm kind of interested in
yeah, I
high
agreed.
school ranks, like especially on the defensive line, looking
Yep.
at guys like Cam Beavers, Jeffrey Rush, like those type of guys staying in the program. I'm interested to see if those guys can be impactful and develop the way that some of these other teams are doing it. But on the surface, Ole Miss's class was a little underwhelming in that sense.
See, I probably would disagree with that, because I do think Ole Miss does a better job than what people think out of the high school ranks. Like,
that
it's not like,
I could be like 2 years behind,
yeah,
if you will, on Ole Miss, because they
yeah,
have started to recruit high school back.
yeah, and it looks a little bit different from some of the other programs that like bring in bigger classes. But Ole Miss, I mean, top 20 in the high school recruiting trail the last couple of years, and they supplement it more than most in the transfer portal. But I do think they've like the MO for Lane Kiffin is like, we're gonna use the transfer portal. Okay, but in reality, they recruit high school better than most people think. Dill, I'll throw in one more loser, and you might disagree with this. Georgia.
Yeah, I disagree a little bit,
All
but
right, well, I'll hit you with the reasoning first. One, you let Carson Beck walk, and that I don't like. I know he declared for the NFL draft, but I'm stunned that there wasn't more communication there. You know what I mean? That seems like a miscommunication between Georgia and Carson Beck. And to the Georgia fans, they're saying we didn't want Carson Beck back. I think, respectfully, that's I don't agree with it. Like, Carson Beck is better than what I think you have on your roster. Number two, you address the wide receiver position. That was about it, though, right? I mean, you bring in some safeties like Jaden Harris. Jaden Harris was not good for Miami. Like,
yeah, but what good safeties coming to Georgia when you have those young guys that they have? I mean,
then why did they bring in 3 of them?
because they needed depth, but it's tough to bring in top-end talent when you have that type of guy. Like, again, Georgia's always going to have their coverage rated, I think. We'll pretty much see that for most years, just like Ohio State.
Yeah, but you don't want to lose your quarterback one, and you don't want to lose who I think would have been your best edge rusher this year.
Damon Wilson was the one loss that was like,
and
that stinks.
And I think my last take is that I'm not sold on Zachariah Branch being worth the value he got in the transfer.
They brought 2 wide receivers, and I know Noah Thomas took some.
I like Noah Thomas.
You're probably.
I'm good with Noah Thomas. I love that addition. But Zachariah Branch is like, he's really fun to watch. He's a superior athlete. But holy smokes, like, there's some refinement in his game that needs to take place. And I think Georgia needed a guy that they can plug and play. I'd much rather get a Dane Key, who they were kicking at and then lost to Nebraska.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at with Georgia. Georgia doesn't need to use the transfer portal either. Like, you see the classes they stack out of high school, so it's not like they're big losers and they're not going to be good next year. I think there were some spots on their roster they could have addressed. They also lose Carson Beck and Damon Wilson. To me, I'll put him as a slight loser. Any other winners or losers you want to shout out before the boys wind down here?
Probably last one for me would be Notre Dame. I think a really strong total, like not super loud, but added a couple of really good wide receivers and then a couple of really nice depth pieces on the interior defensive line. I look, again, team that doesn't really lose a whole lot, going to get their whole offensive line back, have some good running backs, obviously, coming back in most of their like young piece on defense. I think they addressed the 2 spots they needed, gave themselves a really good chance to put themselves back in the national title.
So hot take here. The 2 wide receivers Notre Dame brought in Malachi Fields and Will Pauling. I think I don't know if I go that, but it's like that's comparable to what Georgia brought in terms of my player evaluation. Will Pauling as a pure wide receiver right now, I think I take him over Zachariah Branch. So Zachariah Branch's ceiling is higher, and I'm sure I'm going to get smoked in the comment section for that. But I watched a lot of USC football, and I watched Zachariah Branch, like, special athlete. And if you're Kirby Smart, if you're Georgia, you're probably looking at him saying, hey, we can get this kid rolling. And they might. And I might have egg on my face, and Zachariah Branch might be a dude. But as a wide receiver right now, I'd probably take Will Pauling over Zachariah Branch. All right, we'll sign out there. I'm going to get smoked for that Zachariah Branch comment. But that's the name of the game, man. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.